Council's hearing in the Committee on Planning, Development, and Transportation on docket number 0736. My name is Michelle Wu, and I'm chair of the committee. I'm joined by my colleagues, Councillor Ed Flynn and Councillor Frank Baker, as well as colleagues from the BPDA who will be giving a presentation. So just to remind everyone, this public hearing is being recorded and broadcast live on channels Comcast 8, RCN 82, Verizon 1964, and streaming on the City of Boston website. So if you could please silence your cell phones and other devices, we would appreciate that. And if anyone wants to sign up for public testimony, please sign in at the front, and we will take your testimony in the order that you sign in. I'd like to make sure that we at least get to offer the opportunity to testify to some people before diving into the presentations in case people have scheduling constraints. So we'll get the sheet to see who's already on there. The full docket, just for the record, is docket 0736, a hearing order regarding the City Council's biannual urban renewal progress updates. So I'll turn it over to my colleagues first to give any opening statements. Then I will offer the opportunity for the three people who have signed up at the beginning to give their testimonies. You can also feel free to wait and hear the presentation first and then testify after if you'd prefer that. And then we'll turn it over to the BPDA for their PowerPoint and then question and answer. Councillor Ed Flynn.
Thank you, Councillor Wu, for your leadership on this issue. Thank you to Mayor Walsh and his team at various departments in the city for their leadership on this issue as well. Looking forward to hearing your opening statements, your testimony. Looking forward to hearing from the residents of Boston on this important issue. I'm also looking to hear about testimony that impacts our seniors, persons with disabilities, our immigrant community, what your plan, how it protects them, how your plan protects residents that need housing, that can't afford housing. At this time where the federal government has turned its back on public housing, how are you going to protect residents that desperately need housing, low-income families, our seniors, as I mentioned, in our immigrant communities? That's what I'm going to be looking forward to hearing from you on your commitment to affordable housing for low-income families. Thank you, Councilor Wu.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Baker?
I'm good, Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, thank you to the BPDA for your patience. I would want to call and offer the opportunity for Diane Valley, Johanna Hines, and Ford Cavallari to testify. You could come to either of these public testimony microphones and please state your name and address for the record. And if you could keep your testimony to 2 minutes, we would very much appreciate it.
Good morning. Thank you so much for allowing us to be present today. We want to thank City Council and also the Mayor's Office and all of the organizations, including the BPDA, for your service to our community. I just want to read a letter that I've presented to the Council because Charlestown is really affected by urban renewal, and we'd like to present to you some of the thoughts that we're working with. I have submitted them online. I have 16 copies. Thank you for this opportunity for Charlestown residents to inform the City Council that the Charlestown community wants a master plan focused on the whole town, not parts of it, with a focus on density, height and infrastructure, transportation, traffic, public health issues, development that is sensitive to the character and scale of Charlestown, the environment, green space, education, housing, and the most unique feature of Charlestown, which is the history of the Battle of Bunker Hill. I'm submitting to you over 2,100 signatures on a petition for a master plan for our town. The Charlestown community is working in good faith, organizing to create an informed community, to participate with the BRA at meetings, to create the best possible responsible growth and development while we preserve and enhance our vibrant social fabric and embrace the future challenges of Charlestown while we maintain sensitivity to our past. The Charlestown community has met with the BRA representative, Jason Ruggiero, 2 times in what the BRA advertised as chats with the planner on August 19th and September 17th. At each meeting, the community attendance exceeded the seating capacity in the room. Listed below are topics that were discussed with the BRA at these Charlestown community meetings, providing relevant feedback which will serve as guidelines for a collaborative and productive planning process. At the meetings, we'd like open, publicized public meetings at a centrally located community space to accommodate over 50 people with a sound system at the time of day that our standard community meetings meet, which is 7 to 9 p.m. on a weekday, allowing the most amount of residents to attend. Meetings that are advertised are not to be moved arbitrarily unless there is a community consensus or an emergency which warrants a move, as in when Faneuil Hall was found to be too small for the Patriots, they moved their meeting to Old South Church. The BRA took copious notes on whiteboards that were used as tabletops. We request whiteboards are made visible from the audience as they are designed to enhance our discussions. The BRA took copious notes, and the BRA agreed to provide the community the minutes of the meeting within a reasonable time frame, which we hope will be less than 1 week. If a planner is advertised to be in attendance, a BRA planner should attend for the entire meeting and not arrive late or be in an off-site location. We seek transparency, and we hope the BRA will continue with their agreements to update the BRA Charlestown website with meeting and date times so our community will know when they are, and agree to post the meeting minutes after they distribute them. We'd like them to post relevant links or documents pertaining to our meetings and continue to advertise in our local newspaper, the Charlestown Patriot Bridge. We look forward to the support of the City Council and your committee to engage in this important process with the Charlestown residents. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Diane. Would Johanna or Ford like to testify at this point?
See if this microphone works. Great. Hi there. Good afternoon. My name is Ford Cavallari. I'm the chair of the Alliance of Downtown Civic Organizations, which represents the 9 largest downtown organizations in Boston. We tend to be, our footprint tends to align pretty well with the urban renewal zones. And I just wanted to say at the beginning of this process that I want us to remember that 3 years ago when we talked about an extension for the urban renewal zones, we as the communities of downtown expressed a very strong opinion that these are sort of obsolete organizations, they're obsolete structures that are no longer needed because, number one, the old urban renewal that they were created for is done, and number two, they don't align for the most part with where a lot of the development is happening now in Boston, whether it be in Dorchester, whether it be in Allston, whether it be in East Boston, Suffolk Downs redevelopment, none of this is in urban renewal zones. So one of the hopes of all of our groups was that we would have serious discussions about sunsetting all of the urban renewal zones. Obviously, each would have its own issue and each would be on its own schedule depending on the land disposition agreements and other things. But I just want to make sure in this hearing that we don't lose track of the fact that there is this overarching desire among many of our community groups that the urban renewal zones go away. Doesn't mean we want the BRA to go away necessarily. We like the BRA to do the big things. Brian Golden and his leadership of the BRA has been terrific, we think. We know that there's renewed focus in the BRA on a water dam system, Amsterdam-like system that they want to renew study on. I think that's absolutely the kind of big picture thing the BRA should be working on. But with urban renewal zones continuing to kick along, We have an overlay system for all zoning. We have different systems for small, medium, and large development. We have unnecessary layers of bureaucracy that make even the most seasoned bureaucrat not know where to go to get a zoning variance. And unfortunately, as we've seen in the ZBA, that kind of system can be gamed sometimes. So I would just urge us to take advantage of the opportunity to use urban renewal sunsetting as an opportunity for simplification of the entire zoning system. And let's not forget that 3 years ago, we talked about sunsetting these zones. And I'm hoping when we hear the presentation, we're going to hear at least half, maybe 3/4 of these are going to go away soon, rather than stories about why we need them forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Ford. Would Ms. Hines like to speak now? Is she... Oh, okay. All right. Great. So we are also joined by Councilor Edwards. Thank you. Would you like to make an opening statement, Councilor? Okay. So we'll hand it over to Chris and the team for your presentation.
Is it on?
Yep.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Wu and members of the council. Thank you for this opportunity to speak here today. My name is Christopher Breen, Urban Renewal Manager at the Boston Planning and Development Agency. Joining me today are Devin Quirk, Director of Real Estate, and Renee Lefebvre, our General Counsel. We are here to provide a summary about our recent proposal to DHCD regarding 14 of the remaining 16 urban renewal areas. We have made the document available for download to the public on our Urban Renewal webpage. The focus of today's discussion will center around the 6 urban renewal plan areas of Phase 1 of our community engagement strategy and our preparations as we enter Phase 2 and 3, beginning at the end of this month, leading and culminating into early December. So I just wanted to start off with the title page, taking a quick look at the title page, because a lot of us here might not recognize it. Maybe some of my friends in the back may or may not. That's actually a picture of Charlestown, where I grew up, pre-urban renewal. That is at the corner of Oak Street in Maine, with the elevated train above it. At the time, it's unrecognizable today and currently houses affordable elderly senior homes at the General Warren. The next slide shows a picture of the proposal to DHCD regarding our 14 urban renewal plan areas. It is a roadmap of those 14. It's a 249-page document with all materials, sign-in sheets, and presentations included. Those are the presentations I went out into the community and presented. They're all available on our webpage for download to the public, and anyone can read through them and reach out to me with any questions. That Phase 1 included 6 urban renewal areas, 5 of which are up for renewal in 2022. They include North Station, School Franklin, Park Plaza, Brunswick King, Boylston Essex, and Kittredge Square. In each of the community meetings, the urban renewal agendas surrounded 5 topic areas. The first of which was the urban renewal background, which sort of did a large look down at the history of urban renewal, talking about the key terms and tools and powers behind urban renewal, and then went into sort of plan-specific goals for each urban renewal area. So we looked at the big picture and the small picture for each urban renewal area in which we were hosting the meeting. The second part was the urban renewal action plan. We talked about where we are in terms of our transparency actions, creation of our website, adjustments to our zoning viewer to include urban renewal parcels, and just our actions with the community in terms of our 30-day minor mod and major mod notifications to DHCD and the City Council. The third section, we talked about our land disposition agreement inventory update. A lot of that was presented in front of our council and is available online. We basically just went through each area, each parcel that we at one point owned and dispensed of, and what that LDA was and what that LDA means to the community. The fourth section was an analysis and inventory of the BPDA owned land in that area. We went through each parcel that we own. We took comments on how to meet community goals if we end up having to transfer those parcels. The last section allowed for community feedback. The community feedback was centered on the plan itself, the boundaries, the parcels that we discussed, that we own, the LDA restrictions and their importance to the area, and whether or not what needs to be done to further community goals in that area. Now, all of those PowerPoints are also available online on our webpage. The first area I went out to is North Station. North Station is not part of the 14 urban renewal areas that are up for extension in 2022. North Station has an expiration date of July 16th in 2020. We are not proposing any further extension of that. In the photo you see above, it's a picture of the Hotel Madison and the elevated North Station Railway above. That's currently the home of the Federal Building on the corner of Lomasney Way. For the North Station Urban Renewal Community Process, we hosted a public meeting on June 18th, 2019. That was advertised in the Boston Guardian, the Post-Gazette, in the North End, in the Regional Review. It was also on our BPDA calendar and urban renewal mailing list, and it was also on social media and community groups that we connected with via the Office of Neighborhood Services. And the picture to your right is a photo of the elevated train on Causeway Street prior to urban renewal. The North Station urban renewal goals, we talked about at our previous City Council hearing, but I'll just briefly go over them. They centered around essentially the removal of the elevated train, a potential building of the new sports arena, and the Federal Building itself were the main goals of that plan, the construction of the Federal Building. This is a map of the North Station Urban Renewal Plan area. In blue, you see the property with the LDA on it, which is the Federal Building. In red, you'll see the BPDA-owned property that we do own in the area. The two pieces in red with the blue arrow pointing to them, those are MBTA air vents. We're in the process of transferring to the MBTA. To your right is a TD Garden passageway. There's a lot of easements on that allowed for the creation of the Hub on Causeway, the TD Bank North Garden redevelopment, as well as the Nashua Street residence redevelopment. So we're going to keep that because of the importance of those easements. Again, North Station expires or sunsets in 2020, July 16th of 2020, and no changes to that will be made. The next community meeting we had was at the Central Business District, School Franklin. That's an archive photo from the 1960s of a business that was condemned. The School Franklin Urban Renewal Community Meeting was hosted on June 19th, 2019. It was advertised in the Boston Guardian, as well as on the BPDA calendar and urban renewal mailing list. It was posted on social media and community groups, along with outreach from the Office of Neighborhood Services. I'm going to quickly go over the goals of the School Franklin Urban Renewal Area, which centered mostly around the removal of deteriorated, substandard, and dilapidated buildings and structures, which prevented new investment. The main area also wanted to encourage increased acceptance of mass transit within the area. Here's a map of the properties in blue with LDAs and the properties in red that we still currently own. One of those properties in red is Old City Hall. Old City Hall has recently signed a lease that gives us regulatory control into the foreseeable future. The other one is the Irish Famine Memorial, which also has a lease signed on it from the Irish Famine Memorial Group. Our recommendation has been to allow this area to sunset, given the properties that we own in it. We took a look at the properties that we own, and we basically believe that it sort of matched what the community needs were in the area, and we didn't foresee any future changes to those two properties. So our recommendation at that time was to sunset the School Franklin Central Business District in 2022. Next up is Park Plaza. For the Park Plaza Urban Renewal Community Meeting, it was held on June 24th, 2019 at the Revere Hotel. It was advertised in the Boston Guardian and the Boston Sun. It was also on the BPDA calendar and Urban Renewal mailing list. And it was also put out on social media, and I contacted community groups in the area via assistance from the Office of Neighborhood Services. The Park Plaza goals mainly centered around improved connections from Chinatown through the Back Bay, as well as an increased expansion of institutional and mixed uses, a lot of roadway realignment and things like that. Next up, we have a top-down view. The areas in blue have land disposition agreements on them in Park Plaza. The land in red is the parcel that we own, known as China Trade. Here is an up-close look at China Trade. China Trade is a success story with its back history of it formerly being a foreclosed building, and it's now running at a pretty high rate of 90+% occupancy, in which a lot of the businesses in there are low income or community needs that might not otherwise be able to afford the rent. So we're proud to maintain that building and keep it in its best shape going forward, and we have no issue with maintaining that building well into the future. For those reasons, the suggestion or the recommendation from our office was that Park Plaza could be potentially sunset in 2022. I will add, a lot of the community feedback on Park Plaza was supportive of allowing for that area to be sunset, but there were some people that felt it was important to sort of keep some of it that surrounded the China Trade building, because there were some areas that they felt were blighted, I believe on the eastern side of the Park Plaza urban renewal map, that could have been kept, but given the nature of the only building that we own in that area is the China Trade building, and we control it, the recommendation at this time was to allow it to sunset and to potentially look at that area which the residents had concerns along Boylston, Essex, Washington Street, and potentially look at what it would be like to maybe do a new urban renewal area that fit the boundaries that they felt were necessary and needed in order for the central business districts to strengthen. Next up is the Brunswick King area. Everything's dead. One sec.
You have to believe when you press it.
Slight IT issue. Oh, here it is.
Oh, there.
No.
Wait.
Alrighty. Next up is the Brunswick King Urban Renewal. We held a community meeting out there on June 25th, 2019 at the Grove Hall Community Center. That was advertised in the Bay State banner. It was also placed on the BPDA calendar and urban renewal mailing list. We also reached out via social media and community groups in the area via the Office of Neighborhood Services. The Brunswick King goals we went over in detail in the community meeting. Briefly, they essentially surround development of parks and open space to support existing and proposed residential uses. They centered on also providing for public facilities and the need of expansion. There's a lot of schools out in that area, and those were the needs at the time. To your right, we have the Brunswick King Urban Renewal Plan area. In blue are the parcels that have land disposition agreements on them. To your right, in red, are the parcels that we still currently own. which consist of about 7 parcels. The first group of parcels that we own are known as Parcel P2. They are right next to or abut Ceylon Park. A lot of the community felt like it made perfect sense, and as do we, to transfer them to the Parks Department so that they can be kept as open space and green space for the community going forward. And we're in the process of doing that. We're very close to officially transferring and turning those parcels over to the Parks Department. We also own 2 properties on Intervale Street and Intervale Terrace, seen in the slides above. They're in red. The square parcel behind, I think it's 101 Intervale Street, we are in negotiations to transfer that as an abutter parcel to the homeowner so that he can allow for parking for his car to get it off street. The terrace itself that abuts those other parcels, that's how they access the street. So we currently have easements for them to travel over it, and we'll likely keep that going forward so that they can get in and out of their new areas. The main 2 parcels here in Brunswick King are on Fernborough Street, 27 and 29, as seen in red, and then also seen in the Google photo with the blue arrow pointing to them. There was a community advocate there that was very passionate about building potential housing on those sites, whether they're single or duplex families. He didn't feel that the area should be sunsetted until those particular parcels were properly vetted via the community, and the positive outcomes that the community desired were ready to move forward via an RFP. So we're working with him, and I'm working with Devin's team in real estate to put out an RFP for those parcels, and we really hope for a positive outcome. The next community meeting I had was in the Central Business District of Boylston, Essex. You see a historical map here to your right. Boylston, Essex, the meeting was held on July 15th in 2019 at the Revere Hotel. It was advertised in the Boston Bulletin, the Boston Guardian, and the Boston Sun. It was in the BPDA calendar and the Urban Renewal mailing lists as well. It was also on Twitter and other forms of social media, and I also contacted a community group via the Office of Neighborhood Services. To your right, you'll see a photo of Commonwealth Center. It was what it was formerly called Commonwealth Center. The Boylston, Essex goals basically center around rearranging roads, building the Orange Line, I believe it's the Chinatown station. That was essentially why we took the area, to really sort of push public transportation into that area, and that goal seems to be completed. To your right there, you'll see a map of the area, a top-down view. In blue is the building that has an LDA on it, and the black line consists of the actual urban renewal area that was used to realign the street. We don't own any property in the area. There is a question of an easement to make sure that the MBTA got that easement when they put in the station, which I'm still investigating. But other than that, it doesn't appear that we own any property, and thus our recommendation would be to sunset that area in 2022. Next up is Kittredge Square. You're seeing some boarded up homes along Highland Street near the Alva Kittredge Park in the early 1970s. Briefly, the goals of the Kittredge Square area were essentially to preserve and enhance the historical structures. There's some beautiful brownstones out there that were preserved, enhanced via urban renewal, and to increase moderate and low-income affordability housing options for the area. In terms of the Kittredge Square Urban Renewal Community Meeting, the community meeting was held July 16, 2019 at Roxbury Community College. It was advertised in the Bay State Banner, as well as the normal forms, the BPDA calendar, the Urban Renewal mailing list, social media, and community groups as well as the Office of Neighborhood Services. To your right, you'll see some more boarded up homes along Linwood Street from the early 1970s. Again, this is a top-down view of what we've accomplished so far in Kittredge. In blue are the parcels that we've disposed of with land disposition agreements currently still on them. In red are the parcels that we still own and we're actively trying to transfer or dispose of. Just to go over those parcels like we did in the community. The first of which is parcel 34B. It's also known as 25 Linwood. It's a small sort of parcel that could be used as a side yard or could be used in a butter sale. That may potentially have to go out to RFP. We'll have to double check that, or if it can be sold to an abutter. Either way, it's more than likely to be open space, and that's what the community wanted. Next up are the parcels at the rear of 115 and 121 Cedar Street. They abut the Cedar Street Gardens communities. We own them. They're basically the entrance into those gardens. We would love to transfer them on to a couple of the garden communities who have reached out and who we are in contact with, so that they can forever be open space and community gardens for the good of the neighborhood, which seemed to be what they wanted. Next up, we have parcel A1, which is 23 Highland Street. It's the one to the right, circled, and also there's a photo of it to the right. We've taken a look at it. It is a potential housing site, but some in the neighborhood would like to keep it an open space site or potentially a place for parking. There will have to be an RFP for this one for it to go out. There's been a lot of work out there in the past, and you're going to see us moving forward with it and on it, as long as we move forward with the community behind us and we meet those community goals. The next one is 21 Morley Street to the left. It's the one higher up above the street. There's a photo of it to your right. It's a small sliver parcel. It could be used as like a side yard or some sort of open space. I suppose it could also be a housing site. It likely need variances, but the community seems like they want that to be remain an open space. But we're in active conversations, and of course, we're going to meet community needs and goals when it comes to that. So for my next phase 2, we have another 6, and they are Government Center, Downtown Waterfront, Campus High School, South Station, South Cove, and Fenway, urban renewal area. The third phase for my urban renewal community engagement is my hometown of Charlestown in early November, South End, Washington Park, and then ending where it all started, West End. The final slide is just a reminder of our urban renewal action plan. We're still following it, still making progress, still moving forward. We created the BPDA Urban Renewal webpage as an information conduit. We've completed the LDA inventory, and always double and triple checking, as Janet would want me to. We are moving forward with the BPDA-owned inventory that I'm showing out in the community. When I go to each one, I'm explaining, hey, this is what we own, and what would you guys like us to do with it? We are also reviewing boundaries of the existing plans via that same community process. We are exploring the creation of new urban renewal plans via that same community process. I think I forgot to mention that when I was at the Boylston Essex meeting, some of those people wanted me to keep the urban renewal area alive because they didn't want to lose the tools or the protections that the LDA had in place. And they wanted to potentially expand that particular urban renewal area. Because it's only one building and because the goals are complete, I suggested to allow it to sunset, but I did promise them that I would come out to the Boylston, Essex, Washington sort of central business district area and with planners and with Devin's team and see what it would be like or what it would take to do a new urban renewal plan for that area if those community groups and those individuals wanted us to do that. What else? We're continuing to review existing procedures for disposition in a manner that reflects community goals and priorities. I've been a part of that. I've been out there in the community hosting those meetings when I'm not doing the urban renewal larger meetings. We've updated the BPDA zoning viewer to include urban renewal parcels. That's now live. It's a layer on the zoning viewer that you can click on and see my parcel may have an LDA on it. And we're continuing to provide updates on progress as we are here again. Thank you. Our next update is scheduled for May 2020, and we'll take any questions.
Thank you, Council Wu. Thank you, Council Wu, and thank you for your testimony as well. I had some questions. I'll start off generally speaking. Is this document, this is on the home page right now?
Yeah. The one I just presented to you, no, because I didn't. I just showed it to you, but I can be up later today.
Okay, we'll
But
be
the
uploaded.
but the DHCD document from last August is, if that's what, this is like a summary of that document.
Okay, will that be included in Spanish and Chinese?
Yeah, we can make that happen, yeah.
What?
Yes, yes.
Were the other ones are updated in Spanish and Chinese?
I don't believe they are, but I'll make that correction.
Okay. A lot of these projects are in my district. So I'm going to go over a couple of them. In the interest of time, I won't go over all of them. But Boylston, Essex, Washington. You mentioned the business community wants to keep urban renewal alive. Can you give me a little bit of background information on why?
Well, the people in the room that night, anyways, the members felt that if it wasn't hurting them, and these were goals to, or tools to improve development, you know, that area they felt was slightly blighted, and they were asking me, like, well, why can't you just expand the area to use these tools of development to help us, you know, grow here a little bit better than we have. And I didn't have an answer for that, why I couldn't do that. So my answer was, you know, I'd investigate with the planner, going out there and seeing what it would be like to expand or do a new urban renewal area for the areas that they were talking about. They were talking about Boylston Street, Essex Street, and some of the things that they found were not suitable for the area.
I noticed in the presentation you did a lot of outreach to local newspapers in the impacted neighborhood. Did you do any outreach to the ethnic newspapers in the impacted neighborhoods? Did you do any outreach to the Chinese newspapers?
I'd have to double check that. I'm not sure if it went into any of the Chinese newspapers. We did have Chinese translation in every community meeting that we hosted. I'd have to double check with Tammy to see if it went to Chinese newspapers.
Did you, during the translation, did you have both Cantonese and Mandarin?
We had Mandarin. I don't think we had, maybe we had Cantonese. Well, I think we had Mandarin.
Why would you have Mandarin over Cantonese?
I forget which one we had, to be honest with you. It could have been Cantonese. I think it was Cantonese.
I was at a hearing, I was disappointed. I was at a hearing that the BPDA put on, and they had a Mandarin translator a while back, maybe 6 months ago, and the majority of the people in the room were speaking Cantonese. And I was disappointed, and I called the BPDA after, but there's a huge difference for the residents. when you go to the Chinese community, could you let my office know before, so my office and myself can be engaged? I have 2 people on my staff that speak both Cantonese and Mandarin, and it's critical that I'm part of that process.
Yes, absolutely. We have South Cove coming up in October, and we'll be out there together, absolutely. And it was Cantonese, now that I remember it correctly. The translation we had was Cantonese. Yeah, but we'll do that hand in hand. I will definitely need some assistance in that area.
That's my number 1 issue is language access, and I really need to be in the loop on that prior to these meetings.
Yeah.
Counselor, and just
Yep.
speaking from a different area of the BPDA, I just want to agree with you and say that we're certainly committed to providing as universal language access as possible, and sometimes we don't get it right. And I think we try to do our best research on who's going to be attending the meeting, what groups are in the area. I've been to plenty of community meetings where we've had simultaneous translation or a meeting in Spanish or Cantonese with translation to English, but we could always improve, and be great to have an advocate like you helping us determine what the best language access would be, so we can be beyond urban renewal, but just in general.
Okay.
I think that's a great goal.
Yeah, and I just want to allay any fears. When we do the South Cove one, I will definitely, I'll be in your office today, and we'll make sure all the right accommodations are made.
Okay. The Park Plaza Urban Renewal District, are you doing communication to the Chinatown community?
Yes.
How are you doing that?
Through the neighborhood groups, just making sure they know what was going on, that the meeting was when we hosted the meeting prior. A couple of them, I believe a couple of them did attend the meeting as well. I met them there.
How many Cantonese speakers do we have at the BPDA?
I'm unaware of how many.
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but we could certainly get you that information. But I think more likely to require translation services than to use an individual staff member.
Yeah, for my meetings, I had outside translation done for the slides and for the fact sheets and stuff.
How many employees do we have at the BPDA?
200?
230?
Yeah.
200? Over 200?
Yeah, over 200, including the Office of Workforce Development.
And we're not sure if we have one that speaks Cantonese?
I'm sure we do, but
think Phil does.
I mean, it's not necessarily that person's job to provide translation services. I think we want to make sure that we have someone who's not just speaks the language, but also trained in translation if we're going to provide translation services.
Okay.
We can pay for one.
You're good. You're on your roll. You go.
We could pay for one to come, right? Yeah.
So I have other questions. I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but I'm just trying to highlight, before, I'll ask follow-up questions, but I'm just trying to highlight the importance of language access is my key goal as part of this round. I can't have my residents not be informed properly. They have to be informed as any other group is informed. And I get frustrated and I get mad when my constituents aren't properly informed of meetings, and they go to meetings and the translation services is not working. I was frustrated with the recent meeting at the Leather District on Lincoln Street. We had communication access issues. We had other issues, logistic issues. And I need to be involved in those conversations. And the reason I say that is I'm in the neighborhood 5, 6 days a week, 7 days a week, and they ask me why wasn't the Chinese community engaged in the process. And I say to them, I'll get back to you, and I'll make sure that I follow up with BPDA, but they want to be involved, they want to be included, their voice is important. So I just want to stress that to you during this round.
Thank you. I mean, you're 1,000% right, and I see you every day, so we'll make sure that everything's done according to the way you feel is appropriate.
Thank
So I'm going to hand it over to Councillor Edwards, but I just wanted to interject to back up Councillor Flynn, because as committee chair, what I'll say is that I have witnessed this exchange, this exact exchange, every 6 months for the last almost year plus now, of Councillor Flynn actively saying, I want to be part of this. I want to make sure my constituents are involved. And we kind of, and I know, Chris, you're relatively new to it and you're doing a great job, but there has been just this, every 6 months we have the same conversation over and over again. What I would recommend for at least this piece of it is that maybe in addition to doing map-specific meetings, you could work with Councillor Flynn and do a Chinatown community-specific meeting where you go over several of the maps, all of them that tangentially touch it, and the big picture, so that we're not bound by the arbitrary boundaries of these maps, which actually historically tend to be built around the whole communities that have the privilege to advocate to be in one whole community, and then not to kind of further disenfranchise communities that are divided up into several maps, and we see the result even decades later. So that, not to create extra work for everyone, but it feels like that is the way to engage the community, not to ask them then to come out for the next 6 meetings with more notice, which is great, and we should do that anyway, but to say, we're going to go to you, have Councillor Flynn host it, and have the appropriate interpretation services, and then structure the meeting differently in a way that suits and meets that community.
I think that's a great idea, as long as Councillor Flynn can help me host that, and because they know you, and I don't mind facilitating the information so that they get where we're coming from and what our plans are, and because I was planning on going out a second time anyways to every community, just to say hey, this is the report, and what do you guys think? Stop the
But
train.
bundle all of the maps together that have any impact on the area.
On the Chinese community.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Edwards.
I want to thank you all for being here, and to the folks who are from my district, and also folks in general who are just, I think, very concerned about how we're planning not just the future of Boston as a city, but our neighborhoods and how they can thrive. I want to break my questioning up into 3 buckets. One is continuing on the access and, I guess, transparency that Councilor Flynn was dealing with. Then also want to deal with we had brought this up in a separate hearing, but I think it's very important for us to really discuss, again, transparency and making sure that promises are fulfilled under 121A, which is how a lot of some of the urban renewal is implemented through institutions and corporations getting basically this land tax-free, called blighted land, and then being able to make a lot of money off of it. So I want to talk about that. And then finally, I want to talk specifically moving into phase 3 in Charlestown. And I have follow-up questions from the last time we were talking. You were not here at the time, Chris. But I will give those questions again to make sure that we have a follow-up, maybe a public meeting with that.
I'm always listening, though.
I know. So let's talk about access points. And I just wanted to make some suggestions and also statement. Part of the access, access is a social justice issue for planning and being able to be at the table and feel that you are heard. So when you look at the table and you see who is there, who's consistently there, and who is not, and if the BPDA is not part of making sure that that table is diverse as possible, whether you mean to or not, you are continuing the systemic biases and systemic issues that a lot of communities already have. So that's one thing. So I want you to, as you're going to anybody's community, especially the ones I represent, if you're looking at a room and you're finding that majority of the conversations that you're having are consistently with upper middle class, predominantly white, predominantly highly educated folks, that is not a bad thing. But our community, especially in Charlestown, is not just that community. And so if all of the planning conversations happen with that community, then I want you to, I think it's important, the BPDA, because you represent all of the communities, right? Look at that as a dearth, and look at that as a delta, and see that for a lack of access, and that you cannot continue those conversations and call that a successful attempt at meeting people where they are, or a successful attempt at having a true community conversation. I struggle with it too. This is not just the BPDA. I struggle with it too, with the meetings that I host, with the hearings that I have. But I'm saying this because on Tuesday there were 2 meetings about planning. future of Charlestown. One meeting on the BPDA was hosted at the library. Criticism I heard from 4 to 6. I don't know why we didn't have a later time where a lot of people could come after work. But at the other meeting I had, it was in the CRA with the Charlestown Resident Alliance. It was one of the best run community-led meetings I've ever been to, where they discussed literally how they are going to leave their home. 53 families are going to leave Charlestown unless we come up with a way for them to stay on site, which is what the CRA and the folks are fighting for 40 units. And it's the juxtaposition of those two meetings, demographically, income-wise, tone, who felt that they were at the table. And it's like being in two different cities at the same time. But here's the difference. You are an agency that represents the entire city and the entire neighborhood. And so, as I've said for this, in some cases we have the same issues in East Boston. I've suggested this many times at the table, but how do we overcome those divisions? I've suggested that you co-host with community organizations that are already trusted by the community. For example, EBEC in East Boston. They will bring their members there. They will provide the translation. They are there for those folks who are undocumented, who are poor. They go to them for all resources. These are trusted entities. And I remember talking about this before we're going to do Suffolk Downs outreach. And I'm going to say it again. I think the BPDA can host to a certain extent, but you cannot bring a community. The community brings the community, and you need to co-host, not just host in different areas, but co-host with Chinese Progressive Association, co-host with City Life, co-host with these organizations that will bring their members there. And that is that trust relationship that you're going to have to, and I understand the dynamics and the politics of picking which organization, but if you continue not to pick them, you will continue the systemic ways in which we are already divided in our neighborhoods. And that's a concern for me, because the impacts of your decisions are permanent. They will crystallize and assure that certain segregations or certain voices or certain opinions about what is beautiful, about what is just, about what is inclusive, certain voices will be heard on those things and other ones will be drowned out. And you cannot continue to have these meetings that do that. So I just want to say that. And I brought up the suggestion again of co-hosting. I agree with you, Devin, on your comment about translation though. And I wanted to note that just because someone is multilingual, they're hired at the planning department or they're hired at the development department to do that job, right? And if they are going to be translating, then they should be certainly compensated even more for that skill set that they bring in, but they were hired to do that particular job. I agree with you, Councillor Flynn. We should then look at the diversity of the folks and how we're hiring them, and maybe we should consider some translators on site hired directly by the BPDA. But access is social justice. The tables that you create are welcoming or not welcoming, and you can tell if you've done a good job by who's at the table. So I'm just going to say that. And I'm not saying this is intentional. I'm saying I also struggle with it as well. So I'm happy to work with you. I've given suggestions before, but unless those tables look like the neighborhoods that are going to be permanently impacted by your decisions, we're not doing our jobs. We're just not.
So I would just say on behalf of the BPDA, I think that the issues that all three of you are bringing up here are incredibly important. I think we completely agree with you. We see access as a social justice issue too. I think we're committed to improving our engagement efforts. And what we're talking about here is much broader than urban renewal. Urban renewal is one tactical work stream that we're working on right now. It's very important. That's what we're here to talk about today. But the issues you're bringing up, Councillor, are also about our development review work, about our real estate work, about our plan, and particularly our planning work. As I think you know, we've hired. So this is both language access is one part of this. How we host meetings, whether we co-host them or host themselves, what times we host them at, and also what is the structure of those meetings? Should we even do meetings? And this is something that I know our planning team is working on. What is the best way to reach people? But I think we could always improve, and there were some great tactical improvements, including the one Councillor Wu suggested about how to structure these meetings for the Chinatown urban renewal meetings specifically. But I think we want to say we're all ears. You guys live this every day too, and we're amenable to every suggestion on how to improve the community dialogue, and sometimes maybe meetings isn't the right way to do things. Maybe there should be other ways to reach us as well. And I think we have hired a staff of community engagement managers on the planning team whose sole job is to think about this issue, how to connect with the community members that are vested in the decisions that the BPDA makes. So we may not have all the answers on this, but we certainly agree with the concern and also with the direction in which we'd like to take this.
And I think it's important, and I appreciate that answer, and I just want to make sure that they really, that we concentrate on the word engagement and not, community engagement is key, not community management, right? We're not trying to manage conversations, slow them down, or to drown them out. We're trying to truly bring from the community what their ideas are, what they need, and then also to implement them. And so, again, if you're only talking to a certain segment consistently, you're going to miss a lot of what the community needs and wants. But I'm going to move to now the bucket of 121A, if that's okay. 121A, those are tax agreements for those who are unaware. In many cases, to help implement urban renewal, private-public partnerships were made between large corporations, and they were given tax breaks of the tracts of land to develop those land. So they didn't have to pay real estate, and they didn't have to pay, I think they had to pay an excise fee pretty much for years until they were able to bring about the renewal. Many of the many promises is in terms of mitigation to assure that that could happen. The monitoring of those promises, the eventual, whether it's brought out of a blighted area to a fully developed area, a lot of those things were forgotten institutionally, and for many people, these corporations who then set up with the tax breaks, then rented the properties to themselves and then made money off of subcontracts there. It's a loophole that many of them took advantage of, has put us in a situation where a lot of people have questioned urban renewal in general, question who's monitoring this, and then as we saw with children who came and exposed TD Garden's promises from the 1990s to actually raise money for youth engagement, and that they had not fulfilled that promise. We see that in many cases there was not only taken advantage of, but people literally just walked away scot-free and took the money from the city of Boston. So when you tell me that we're going to be phasing out certain urban renewal tracts of land, I think, is TD Garden in the North Station?
It's North Station, yeah.
Yeah? So when you're going to phase that out, and we already found that there have been certain promises unfulfilled, what happens at the phase-out moment? Are we talking about like, well, looks like you haven't, are we going to assess all the promises and the unpaid money raised? Are we going to hold them accountable for that? I think that's a time, since it's coming to an end. Also, I assume then we're going to start collecting real estate taxes. Do we have a record of what's been built there? I mean, how do we make sure we're brought back and made whole as a city?
Counselor, if I may, I'll try to answer that for you. So I'd just like to start with 121A projects aren't just about tax deals. They are about development. It is true they are about public partnership. And really the basis for them are, but for the government intervention, the private market is not going to yield for us a project that what we want to see here. And so as part of the tools of a Chapter 121A, which are very different, or not so much different, but they don't necessarily have to go hand in hand with an urban renewal plan area. But what we do there is we regulate, their benefits and burdens. So the benefits are, one of them being possibly a what is called a 6A tax agreement, where the property goes exempt, but the development does pay an excise to the state as well as a 6A payment to the city of Boston, and that is a negotiated payment. I would say the 6A agreements in the more recent years have been closer to Chapter 59 equivalents, but that's really something for the city and through the assessing department to probably talk about. In terms of what happens when these projects terminate, so they're governed by a regulatory agreement, and that regulatory agreement basically says if you change ownership, if you refinance, if you make changes to the program or the project, that you have to come back to the BPDA for approval. So we are regulating those projects in that regard, what the law allows us to regulate. In terms of what's being built there, those projects, not only do they undergo a Chapter 121A review and approval, but they're also undergoing Article 80 large projects. So they'll be regulated also through a cooperation agreement, which we would also be monitoring whatever mitigation and community benefits have been promised in that way as well. For the TD Gardens, the promised loss that you're referring to, that the kids did find, that was through special legislation, not specifically done under the Chapter 121A. So that project received a whole host of different types of regulations that came through to put it together. But something like that, had it not been done under the special legislation, that we would have captured it in either our Article 80 documents or our regulatory agreement, and we would have monitored it in that way. So when these projects terminate, the obligations under these agreements also terminate, but what we do design them, what we design for them to do is to provide the obligations while they're under that status, the 121A status.
So just to make sure I'm clear, especially with the termination and the promises, when these projects terminate, the BPDA has monitored the entire time whether there's any obligations made under the 121A, but if it's under a special act, BPDA doesn't necessarily monitor whether those promises were fulfilled.
It wouldn't have been under our jurisdiction. So whatever we have jurisdiction for, we would have monitored it, or we at least tried, at least in today's.
Who makes the decision to sunset
So
the urban renewal?
And I know your question's specific to 121A, so this may or not answer your question, but there are a host of restrictions that we can place on our properties, and 121A they're relatively rare and it's a very specific area, and Renee's our expert on that, so we're lucky to have her on the team. But in general, generally speaking, there are two ways which the BPDA would dispose of property, either through a sale of property or a lease.
Right.
If it's a land lease, then the terms of the land lease govern any sort of restrictions that are on the property. We actively monitor that. We have a lease administration team that they do nothing but monitor the terms of leases. That's everything from the payments, which are important, but also the affordable housing restrictions, the other community benefit restrictions that might be, or requirements that might be in the lease. Separately, if we sell a property, we create a land disposition agreement. Chris spoke earlier about we call those LDAs. The LDA database we're putting online, that has the terms and restrictions with compliant. A lot of those are affordable housing restrictions, for example. Compliance team upstairs that monitors affordable housing restrictions. So I want to set the stage that there are teams in place at the BPDA that monitor the core requirements of our dispositions. That's that's the general answer, and then your questions about specifically tax deals, which are rarer, and I think Renee has the better understanding.
Right, so tax deals that result in certain promises made to the city. That's my concern, and it took kids to actually discover that TD Garden, or the owner, I think it's Mr. Jacoby or Jacoby,
Jacobs.
had not, or that entity, the corporation, had not fulfilled its promises. And I'm curious who is going to do the audit, who's going to do the accounting, if that promise wasn't fulfilled, when this is becoming, as we're sunsetting now urban renewal, who's going to be at the table to make sure that we have been made whole? Who's going to be looking at any of those promises made? And since since the decision, I think, is to sunset is coming from the BPDA, I feel that you're in a unique position for any time and point when the sunset's happening. Now, whether you can enforce it or not, I think that's up for the back and forth with the state.
Yeah.
But being transparent about what was promised to the city of Boston under whatever entity, and then saying, well, we got ours under the BPDA, but we can control, but these things are left outstanding. I think that's a conversation that we need to have. I just don't want this closed out, called a day, sunset, millions of dollars owed, and they had a tax break all this entire time.
It's a great point, and I know Chris is part of his effort. He's looking through all the LDAs to look at before we sunset, what do those things say?
Yeah, I'm going to need a job, so I'll be doing that stuff.
So,
But thank you. So we are doing that work. If it's lease, I think we have very good structures in place. If it's a land disposition agreement, as we're making moving towards sunsetting, let's redouble our efforts to make sure we have a great answer to that question, but that we are in fact looking at the LDAs, and then we can get back to you for further details on the 121A.
appreciate that. I can go on, or we can go to Councilor Frank. I had the third bucket on Charlestown in phase 3. Did you finish? Okay. And then my third bucket was on phase 3, specifically looking at Charlestown and questions that I had from the last time we discussed urban renewal in Charlestown. And I don't know that either one of you are actually yet in your current position, so I will give you that acknowledgement that I'm asking maybe you for the first time these questions. And so the questions were concerning when you're looking at urban renewal and dispositions, and also how the need for a community to continue in and under the auspices of urban renewal. Who are you talking with? Specifically, does the BPDA talk with BPS, Boston Public Schools, when you're looking at urban renewal and growth, and specifically build BPS? That came about because of the concerns for the fact that we're tripling the size of the development in Charlestown, the amount of children that are coming on, and when you're looking at plots that are owned by the BPDA in Charlestown, and how you're planning for, or not, how you're not talking also with BPS. That was one of the buckets of questions I had. The other question I had was specifically about how you are engaging specifically on housing and home ownership in Charlestown and looking at urban renewal. I know that there was the two plots, the Bunker Hill Community College parking lots. Again, with the urban renewal kind of auspices, how are you planning specifically for that? And then finally, as you know, there's a good conversation about why we need a master plan in Charlestown. So now you have an urban renewal auspices and the community really calling for it, and I believe to a certain extent being answered by the need for a master plan. So how do you intend to marry the two?
Those are great questions. I can take a stab, and Chris, feel free to jump in. So on the first question around Boston Public Schools, yes, we are certainly talking to Boston Public Schools on a regular basis about different issues. We have a working group of planning, development, review, and real estate with BPS facilities and policy, and some of the folks from the leadership team, just to talk about issues and trends we're seeing in the city. They're running feedback by us about their Build BPS plan. We're talking about real estate holdings we've had. They've approached us several times for just sort of friendly advice on what is real estate, either acquisitions or sales they're considering, just to since we do we're involved in the majority of the city's real estate transactions. We're in a good position to sort of offer them some feedback. When it comes to Charlestown specifically, we talk to them about property that we own in the area, or property that they own in the area. Certainly, for example, the Edwards School parking lot, former BPDA property. We talked to BPS about it, ended up transferring it to neighborhood development because the school thought that it is not necessarily an asset that they need for the long term, and would be better served, the community would be better served for that to be a housing site in the long term. certainly community meetings need to be held and further discussion on that, but that's the sort of type of conversation we have together. So I do think we are in coordination, but we can always improve, certainly. On housing and homeownership, certainly an issue that's really important to me as I work on our real estate efforts, but it's important to BPDA leadership and the mayor that we're using public land for public good. That's something we sincerely believe in. And if you look at how BPDA properties have been developed for residential uses, I think the record speaks for itself. Look at the most recent development on BPDA land in Charlestown is the Bridgeview Center project that's adjacent to Bunker Hill Community College and Hood Park. It's in the middle there, and that's a 100% affordable residential housing development with, I think the second floor is dedicated to individuals who face mobility challenges. So I think it's a project done in coordination with Department of Neighborhood Development. So I think that's a type of project we'd like to see. We in Councillor Flynn's district, working on the Parcel 12 development, a BPD-owned property that will have all the housing units built on that new development will be affordable housing, both home ownership. There'll be both home ownership units and rental units, and we're working to make those rental units as deeply affordable as possible. So I guess the trajectory there is not that we don't do market rate development. In Dudley Square, we are considering some market development, a third market development, and 2/3 income restricted, but really putting the public voice at the front of what we're doing on public land and thinking about how we can use our land to increase affordability options. And on the master plan, and that not my department, but certainly something that that we're involved in. We have folks from policy, or urban renewal, legal, and real estate here. We can have a planner join us in the future. That's being led by our planning department. But certainly we agree with the community testimony that was given earlier. We want to be as open and inclusive during that process. I think there's been some terminology dispute over whether to call it a master plan or a strategic plan, but I think the goals are the same. Charlestown is facing development pressure. How can we manage that growth appropriately? How can we use our real estate assets to achieve a comprehensive community vision of growth in our neighborhood? Both Chris and I live there, so we're particularly vested in it.
I can't afford to live there anymore.
But I wanted to make sure I was clear on how it's married, how the plan is married under urban renewal. How does this?
The master plan, or
Yeah.
how would it be married under urban renewal?
So I can answer.
So what we've been doing is we have sort of the urban renewal team at the BPDA working more hand in hand with the planners, because the next few phases of our outreach is going out to some of the bigger urban renewal areas. And so we know that we have to tailor and be very specific about what we may be proposing for changes to those plans. And so we know we can't do that, just with one team, heading one way and another. So we've actually been working hand in hand with the planners and trying to come up with ways on, again, how we're going to address all the different goals that the plan currently has, and what we're seeing today from the community, like things like climate resiliency and boundary changes, and also things like some of the strategies that the community has already come out and spoken about, looking at the Rutherford Avenue corridor, things like that. So we are working with the planners, and then once we sort of have a comprehensive list of the things that need to be addressed, then we put a proposal together to see if they fit within an urban renewal plan proposal for changes, or if it makes sense that they stay within sort of the planning, guidelines or world where the planners are out.
I think, having lived in Charleston my whole life, like the fun part of urban renewal anyways, of my job is like, so in the master plan, and a need for Charlestown would be something like an EMS station, and us having property and being able to make that happen or potentially happen is like an exciting thing, because in that way you're marrying the two together. The people of the community are saying, we need this service. The BPDA and urban renewal can help provide that via their land. So it's exciting, it's fun. I think the processes will be married together along with Imagine Boston 2030, along with the coastal resiliency studies. And I'll be bringing the coastal resiliency people out with me as part of phase 2 and phase 3, along with the planners, because that's a complicated topic. And that was it.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Councilor Baker? Okay. So my questions, and I know we have 3 people still signed up to testify. I just wanted to quickly make sure my understanding was clear, just for the record. So from your presentation, it sounded like there are 4 areas that are very likely to sunset. North Station by July 2020, Central Business District, School Franklin, Park Plaza, and Central Business District, Boylston, Essex, although there was a sort of an asterisk around Park Plaza and whether...
For Boylston, Essex, Park Plaza, I would say that they're more than likely going to sunset. There was an asterisk between both because people wanted me to investigate doing a new one because they're basically touching each other in that general area.
Okay.
We just don't know the boundaries yet.
Okay, but that Brunswick King and Kittredge Square were likely, still had some outstanding issues, but probably in this near term could be resolved, maybe by 2022 even.
Correct. With the team, Devin's team, that's really talented and growing, we'll be out there and we're doing our best to resolve those issues and just make sure they meet community needs. And I foresee a path to move forward by 2022, but if not, probably shortly after.
And Councilor, as we went over this with DHCD, and we told them that this is what we're seeing based on the community outreach that we've done so far. But what they've asked us to do is to continue with our outreach and our engagement, and that we would come back in a year from August to DHCD to update the proposal and give them more of a final version, and then that way our initial outreach will have been complete as well. So some of those goals or what we're looking at might change slightly, only because we might have finished with the disposition, so we know that we can propose for this to sunset, or we might hear differently. So we will be updating it.
Yeah, I'll be coming back out a second time, just because I know there's always someone that didn't hear, and I'll be getting new information. So yeah, they might change slightly, but that's the plan.
So
for
4 likely to sunset, 6 total possible to sunset, and then the remaining 10, which were 6 in phase 2 and 4 in phase 3, are also the largest ones. So it felt like they're, given that the outreach is going to be later anyway, probably won't be at a point where you will likely be asking for extension of those 10.
It sounds like what we'll be looking at there, based on with our community, is boundary changes, possibly, and for any of them that we may be seeking extension, it will be very strategic, very precise. We will not be asking for, something blanket, or we will be asking for areas depending on what our analysis is showing and community feedback that we're getting.
When I met with DHCD, they suggested that I could be very creative with the boundaries, sometimes not even touching each other. It could be in the same. So that'll be up to the community, I guess.
Okay, and those meetings for phase 2 and phase 3 will be done by the end of the year, or?
I would imagine so, yeah, unless something goes wrong, but I would imagine early December.
Okay.
Yeah, the schedule.
And when you are approaching those communities, given that phase 2 and phase 3 maps feel like they're in a different place and size and kind of category than the phase 1 maps, are you proactively, you'll walk through the parcels and everything, but are you going to suggest a 10-year extension to wrap things up, or any amount of time?
That's a good question.
We believe, based on where we think we're headed, that any extension would be it will be varying depending on exactly what needs to be done, and depending, again, on working with the community and proposing what we see there, and then just, again, seeing if that's what they want to see as well.
Okay. And so by our next council check-in in April or May, at least the outreach will have been done, and maybe even a second wave, so that you will have some public conversation about what you are likely going to finalize into the August 2020 update to DHCD.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. And then my last question was on, you had mentioned, I forget which area it was, maybe Brunswick King, that there's, some conversations around not sunsetting a particular area because on one parcel, the developer wanted to keep it until it was designated. Can you explain why and what you'd be able to do with that versus without it in that case?
We own it, and there was just one guy. He's like a housing advocate in the area that he's very passionate about being highly involved and getting the community involved in what should go there. He suggested a duplex and affordable part of that, and he's like, I don't want you guys to move forward until this is right, and I'm involved and the community's involved. So that was just me sort of being amicable to him.
And is that about the exemption from 30B and trying to keep that and all the way through until the designation is done with urban renewal?
I wasn't at the meeting, but it sounds like it was probably a constituent rather than a developer.
It was a constituent, a community leader. I wouldn't call him a developer at all.
Okay.
So I guess, to answer your earlier question, Councilor, about those two that were likely to sunset, I think it's the same answer here. We think we're on a trajectory to sunset them, and maybe we can accomplish that without an extension. Mm-hmm. But I think that's going to come down to Chris is doing a great job creating an emerging community consensus around what should be done with the properties in these areas. Will we be able to actually finally execute on that by 2021? Can we, so a couple of these, you heard that affordable housing was probably the likely outcome of that. I think we have not answered the question definitively whether we should wait until the affordable housing is completed construction to sunset urban renewal, or if we'd feel comfortable sunsetting urban renewal in that area while a designation process was underway. So that's sort of an unanswered question.
Okay. Are there any areas or parcels, I'm going to rephrase that. Is one of the considerations around maintaining this 30B exemption so that you will be able to designate developers without the same kind of process, or does that not necessarily apply?
In these areas, no, because I think we're very committed to doing an open, fair, and transparent process that would mirror 30B very, very closely.
And the 30B exemption is not just tied to urban renewal areas, right? You could technically use the 30B exemption through the BPDA outside of urban renewal areas
through our
as it is.
demonstration, I'm going to defer Renee on this, but I believe the answer is through our demonstration project authority, and I think one of the real public benefits of urban renewal agency is its 30B exemption, particularly when it comes to acquisition of property. Not something we're doing today in a big way, but I would just to discuss this before, the example of the foreclosure crisis, when the BPDA was able to act quickly and purchase homes that were in foreclosure to keep those homeowners in their homes and not have them become bank-owned, is something that an urban renewal authority can do. It could do through demonstration project authority versus urban renewal areas. Correct me if I'm wrong on this, Renee, but but that's not something the city of Boston could do in the same way.
But I just also want to point out that as part of our last extension and approval from the state, we have an agreement that we will follow a specific process for disposition of real estate that is really mirrors the DHCD process today under their mass regulations. So we do have to provide them with the appraisals that we're doing, the notices and the outreach, the land disposition agreements that we plan to enter into, so that they have that review of what we're doing before we finalize.
And just going back to the affordable housing and foreclosure crisis example for a second. So the idea is that the city could, D&D, for example, could purchase a distressed property, but then you're saying the city versus the BPDA could not turn around and give it back to the residents without an open process?
The city can acquire property for municipal purpose. Public housing is a municipal purpose, so government-run housing, privately operated affordable housing, I believe, is not considered a municipal purpose. So I think we can go do a deep dive on this to make sure we give you a very definitive answer.
Okay.
But I think that the city could not purchase a private home and keep that homeowner in it.
Okay, I would love to look into that more. All right, any other questions? Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Council. Thank you, Devin. Yesterday I had the opportunity to visit the dedicated and professional library staff at the Chinatown Library. And although it's small, it's an excellent library. Obviously, it's located in the China Trade Center, and it's getting a lot of use. And it's probably, in my opinion, I think it's one of the best accomplishments of this administration, is building a library, although, as I mentioned, it's temporary, and I know the city is headed in the right direction with the permanent library. So I was talking to some of the elderly residents there last night. I was there at 5 o'clock. They asked me about the possibility of a permanent library, but they asked me specifically, would the temporary library close because they're doing renovations at the building before the new library is open?
So the renovations planned for the China Trade building are largely a painting project to paint the atrium, make it a nicer space as you enter the library there. So I would have to ask BPL for a definitive answer, but I'm pretty confident the answer is no, that the temporary library is there until the permanent library.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping for. I would never want to see the temporary one close until the permanent one is opened. So I appreciate that. And I'm just wondering, as it relates to school in Franklin, the goals, but generally speaking, you know, the last 3 goals you have: stabilization of property taxes, rehab, if there's any buildings in dilapidated buildings, structures, encourage increased acceptance, mass transit. But is there a way that we want to update the goals of urban renewal for today? You know, a lot of the goals have been accomplished. There's not much, there's no decline in property values in the downtown area. There's no buildings that are in rough shape, and we are encouraging everybody to use mass transit. But is there a way for us to update our goals as it relates to urban renewal?
So that's actually going to be one of our focuses as we go out for the next few.
Okay.
For example, one example would be to add climate resiliency to the urban renewal plans for those areas that touch the water. So I guess the short answer is yes, we would be looking at that as well.
Okay. I think the old City Hall building is one of the nicest buildings in Boston. How many tenants do we have in there?
So the way that building's operated is different from the China Trade Center. So the China Trade Center, the BPDA has no long-term land lease for it. We do direct leases to all the tenants on all the floors. So we're the landlord. In the case of the old City Hall building, it's a land lease. So there's an ownership entity that for the next, I think it's less than 99 years, but it's more than 70. It's about 70. That is effectively the landlord of that property. So we don't get a regular sort of subtenant occupancy report on that one. So I wouldn't know off the top of my head what the tenancy picture looks like in the old City Hall building, but we did in a previous sale of that building's lease, negotiated for significant improvements to the public realm and the historic facade, and keeping that building in great shape. And we were able to take a tour of it recently. It seemed pretty well occupied, and you'll see some of those improvements being made in the coming weeks. But we'd have to talk to the landlord to get you the details on the tenancy.
Thank you. And then my final comment, I guess, not really a question. You don't have to respond. Maybe we can talk later. But as in kind of a follow-up to Councilor Edwards on the Boston Garden issue, we read recently in the newspaper of the BCEC possibly expanding and the Heinz Convention Center possibly being sold. The Heinz Convention Center is in my district. Obviously, the BCEC is in my district. I'm wondering, can part of the conversation be, as it relates to BPDA, can we also look at the Heinz Convention Center? Can we also look at the BCEC, especially the BCEC, when it was opened? Are there any agreements that haven't been met in terms of outreach to working with the community to, as part of the community process, where residents would feel empowered and were able to build, whether it was a library or other city services or nonprofit organizations? Is there anything in those contracts that haven't been dealt with?
It's a great question, Councilor, and I think we'll take you up on your offer. We're just, the staff at this table are just learning about that, so we'd love to look into that and talk to Director Golden about it and get back to you, but it's a fantastic question and an issue that I'm sure we'll be working on in the coming weeks.
And I just want to say thank you to the panelists for your professionalism today, for your hard work, and please let Director Golden know that we appreciate your hard work, and I always had great respect for Director Golden, especially his work and advocacy in helping so many military families across our state. So thank you.
Thank you. We will. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. So no further questions from my colleagues. We will move to the final three members of the public who signed up to testify: Johanna Hines, Allison Pultinas, and Martin Roeder. Again, if you could come to either one of these microphones, state your name and address for the record, and limit your testimony to 2 minutes, kindly.
I've never done this before.
Yes.
So yes, I'm Joanna Hines, spelled like the convention center, but no relation. And I live in Charlestown. I've lived in Charlestown for 15 years, not my whole life, but I hope to spend the rest of my life there. It's a really special place. And it's taken me a long time to kind of wake up to all of the changes that are on the table, as you put it. And I've been busy being a mom and just busy like everybody else, but I am invested now, and I want to give my time and my voice. I showed up at the meeting that was held, the planners chat on Tuesday. My son goes to Roxbury Latin. I drove all the way to West Roxbury to get him so that he could come to the meeting. I saw people dropping off, people that have been born in Charlestown, don't have cars or can't drive anymore, at the door of the library because they wanted to be there. There were like 60 people at 4 p.m, maybe 70. It was incredible. Like, living in Charlestown has always been great, but that meeting made me so proud to be not a townie, but a member of Charlestown. I wish, I know I gotta be reborn. Yeah, I get that though. Anyway, so I get there and I'm like, and there is a poster board as big as my arms are wide, redirecting people to a spot that was not disclosed in advance, down on the corner toward the entrance for Whole Foods. They have a table, they have a sign, they have a clipboard, and a man, the planner, there to answer questions. There are 60 plus people, half over the age of 65, waiting at the library to chat with the planner, who refuses to come inside and says to me and a handful of others that this was a choice made on the fly because it's a nice day. I said to him, all these people are waiting for you inside. You can't just sit out here. They're waiting to talk to you. He said, 2 of my colleagues are in there, neither of whom are planners. So I redirected as many people as I could because it was a clear distraction. It was disorienting for people that weren't sure. If you had walked by and seen this table and the sign promoting this as the chat, you would have said, this must not be a big issue because there is nobody here. I'm not going to worry about it. Meanwhile, there are 70 people that are worried about it upstairs. So that was a real turnoff as like the entree into this caring about Charlestown for me. But it also got my Irish up, and now I'm going to fight even harder. Not fight with someone, but fight for something. Charlestown's like the mother of Boston. It's different. It's not just a town in Boston. It is the town, and it needs to be respected. And these rules around like how we're going to redevelop it need to be reflective of it being the mother. It's like the mother. Everything starts there. That's it. So I want a master plan.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I want a master.
Allison.
Hi, my name's Allison Pultinus, and I live in Mission Hill, in between the Fenway and Campus High. So those are both plans I'm following for a lot of reasons. I just want to address a few points in the submission to the state. And the 16-page cover letter, the last statement is the BPDA will seek an extension of the term of the plans for most, if not all, of the above 9 urban renewal plans. Those are the 9 in phases 2 and 3. So that includes Fenway, South End, et cetera. So I'm not sure if that contradicts some of what you just heard, but it does say that they will be most likely be seeking an extension. And I'm disappointed that what we thought was going to be a 3-year update as of August is now postponed to August 2020 for really hearing more of the details for those very larger plans. Addressing the community process so far, obviously having community meetings in July and August, June is difficult, but if you look through the submissions from Chris and you see the sign-in list, there were less than 10 people attending those meetings. And so feedback and process and engagement is really critical, and even understanding this definition of what are we talking about when we're talking about community goals. It's so ambiguous and vague. And sure, sunsetting the ones that are so-called done makes sense. Sunsetting all of them makes sense. They were supposed to be sunsetted, in 2012, 2013? Related to the Fenway and the BRA-owned property, tiny slivers at Symphony Plaza Towers, and those are supposed to be transferred to the T. And so if we're defining whether a plan gets sunsetted as to ownership of BRA parcels, then it seems like the Fenway is a no-brainer. It's definitely not even going to be considered because those were the only parcels owned. On the other hand, if we're talking about LDAs and whether LDAs are extended, that's something that really should be totally transparent. And it came up in May, at the hearing in May, as to whether the public was going to have access to the inventory. And I'm still not clear on what the access is and how that information is being shared. But certainly that should be part and parcel of the whole conversation about sunsetting, is a shared inventory. Okay, so I talked about the community process and the disappointing attendance at the meetings. The scripts, the PowerPoints are essentially duplicates of each other. You can see them online. Just the whole question of ambiguous information about disposition of parcels. And since D&D is doing a lot of the disposition in Roxbury now, it seems like this is a no-brainer, again, to transfer parcels to D&D and have them handle RFPs for those parcels. So, but thank you for the opportunity to speak, and hopefully I didn't go over my 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Martin?
So my name is Martin Roth. I live on Beacon Street in Back Bay. I'm currently chair of the Neighborhood Association of the Back Bay, and I certainly appreciate the councillors for bringing this topic up for discussion. I have a couple of questions which may be considered naive and outrageous, and then a comment about Councillor Finn's raising the question of the Heinz Convention Centre, which is obviously one that is of great concern to the Back Bay community. The first question is, since there seems to be general agreement that the Park Plaza urban renewal zone should be sunset, why not terminate it right now? Why continue with it? The second question is somewhat broader. I am, as you can probably tell, predominantly white, and in my home country would probably be categorized as upper middle class. However, I hope that what I have to say and my experiences nevertheless bear some relevance for broader demographic groups. And what I observe, not just within the Back Bay, but in many other neighborhoods across Boston, is a great deal of concern and even disappointment about the pace, the nature, and the direction of development. So within that broad context of how development takes place within Boston, there's the question of what should be the role of urban renewal zones. And I'm aware from a lot of painful experience that often the kinds of solutions that people come up with are determined or largely determined by the question that is posed. And the question that seems to be posed here is, should urban renewal zones be extended, and if so, why? I suggest that the correct question is, why should any urban renewal zones should urban renewal zones be terminated right now? What is the reason for continuing them? This is on the same principle as zero-based budgeting. You know, even in the private sector, you come across situations in which things continue because they've been around for a long time and they have a certain momentum behind them, and it's very hard to stop them and do something very different. I would submit that the situation we're in now is very different from what it was 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, and therefore we should be looking more thoroughly and broadly at how development takes place within the city and not get hung up upon which particular urban renewal zone should be continued. My final comment has to do with the Heinz Convention Center. The announcement from the governor's office, about which took us and apparently almost everybody by complete surprise. We are certainly in our community reaching out, but initially actually to the state legislature, because they're the ones who will have to pass legislation to make this sale even possible, and to try and find out what is really behind what the governor is thinking. We also intend to reach out to the city councillors, one of whom at least will change by the time we get to mid-November, to get them involved in the process. When we talk about communities, we conceive not only agencies such as the BPDA as being very important, and City Hall, but also elected officials at the municipal and indeed also at the state level. So I hope these comments are helpful. I am trying to disrupt the proceeding in one sense, if you like, but as I say, I think the broader concern here is, what are we going to do with all the developments that are going on in Boston? I looked at all the proposals and ideas that are around within the Back Bay, and quite frankly, it's horrifying in the sense that I certainly will not be able to retire for a very long time to come, nor will my colleagues in NAB, because we're going to have to address them. And I think similar situations are arising in other neighborhoods in Boston. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Is there anyone else who wishes to testify who did not sign up? Okay, then I'll go to closing statements. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you all for coming here today. I think this is the beginning again of a conversation, and I hope that you took a lot of the suggestions about how to make sure we have more accessible and equitable conversations. Those were suggestions, and again, acknowledging that you didn't create that, but we cannot continue as we're going. But I wanted to also acknowledge the work you have done. This, for example, I think you in Charlestown on the Bunker Hill development, the IAG, we created the first youth seat on an IEAG that allowed for kids who live in the Bunker Hill development to have the first youth seat, I think, on an impact advisory group. And they took that very seriously. So I wanted to acknowledge that, but also acknowledge the work the BPDA did in welcoming Turn It Around kids to the BPDA, giving them a full tour. They gave a historical context and actual orientation to Charlestown and development and orientation. And so it's in those moments of conversation. It was almost 2 hours. But it's in those moments of conversation and growth that the kids felt very heard, very valued, and very excited to be part of the planning conversation in a way that I don't know that they had before. So I wanted to acknowledge that work and say we still have a lot more to go. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Thank you, Chris and Renee and Devin and your whole team. It certainly feels like the first few of these check-in sessions were kind of getting through the nuts and bolts and the inventory, and now is the real meat of wrapping it up. And I was very new when we did the first round of urban renewal and the extension period, and I at least feel like there's just much more public awareness, much more understanding on the council side, and we're in a very different place compared to 2015 into 16 of just there's no way even to think about it because we don't even know what we don't even know. At least we sort of know what we don't know at this point, and we're trying to close all of those gaps. So we will continue pushing you on the council side, and I'm grateful for your time and your responsiveness to us and to the community. So we'll look forward to seeing you in 6 months, and this hearing on, oops, I lost my docket number. This hearing on docket number 0736 regarding the City Council's biannual urban renewal progress update is adjourned.